life in general as we go. But I was going to start here for the Ukrainian situation. What in hell's name is going on in this country called Ukraine that hopefully all of you good people can find on a map? And hopefully you've heard something about it in the last year, that things have been going not well / not well there. So this is a lecture I gave literally exactly a year ago today, literally on Twitch, to an almost literally exact same class that you're in right now, World Regions Spring 2022, the old double deuce as I called it last year. So for those of you that know nothing, or that, and that probably isn't any of you, you're all smart peeps who hang out here with me on Twitch, you probably know a little something that Russia invaded this country called Ukraine about a year ago. What was the world thinking exactly a year ago? So a year ago, I gave this talk because there was a lot of chatter on the intrawebs and a lot of news stories where the United States and its allies, but actually mostly the United States, kept coming out with news reports saying, hey, by the way, Russia's getting ready to invade Ukraine. Why would it be the United States that is saying this a year ago? Well, for all of its faults, the U.S. has a pretty badass military and a pretty badass data collection, Central Intelligence Agency, spy satellites, you name it, we've got the best of it. China does too. Russia's got a lot as well. But we're one of the few countries that shares shit that we find out with our allies, unlike China and definitely unlike Russia. And so a lot of troop movement, a lot of material movement, a lot of equipment movement, a lot of movement was being followed by the U.S. military and spy agencies for months and months, possibly even a year, up to exactly a year ago. And it was being widely reported, hey, the Russians are getting ready to invade. What we are seeing is military equipment and humans moving towards the border with Ukraine. And this is too much to be a drill. And now they're building permanent camps and stuff along the border. This is the precursor for a military invasion. And a lot of the world was looking at the stuff going, yeah, it looks that way to us too. So a lot of the stories, Bivash Shali in the house, Bivash Shali saying hello. Welcome, Bivash. What was the state of Ukraine back in January 30, 2022, exactly 1 year ago today? This is a series of news stories that I usually do whenever I do these podcasts. Is I'll pop up a bunch of news stories of what's happening in the world right now to share with you. So from exactly a year ago, live updates. U.S. and Russia accuse each other at UN of stoking Ukraine crisis. The Russians were saying, why you keep saying we're going to invade? We're not going to invade. And the U.S. is like, dude, you guys are getting ready to invade because we're watching you get ready to invade. Other story here. Ukraine requests West send more weapons, criticizes Germany for refusing. Ukraine was also in the loop on all this. Obviously, they were watching the same troop movement roll up to their borders. And so they, months before even this report of a year ago, all throughout the latter part of 2022, the latter part of 2021, Ukraine started asking Western countries for help, saying, hey, can you guys send us guns? Can you guys send us tanks? Can you guys send us missiles? The Russians are getting ready to invade us. Can we get some help? Now, Ukraine has a decent military, but let's make no bones about it. It is outsized by the Russian military 10 to 1. 10 to 1. And in some categories, 20 to 1. In some categories, 50 to 1. And what I mean by that is Russia has 10 times more battle tanks. Russia has 20 times more fighter jets. Russia has 50 times more missiles. Russia has 100 times more active troops than Ukraine had. So if you're looking competitively at two entities, when two tribes go to war, like Frankie Goes to Hollywood used to say, when two tribes go to war, we can queue up the stats on each side, like a football game. And it was obvious to everyone involved, including moi, that this is going to be a fairly one-sided war because Russia so outranked Ukrainian military in every capacity, from men to missiles to munitions to attack helicopters to battle tank to everything. 10 times to 50 times more of everything. Then there's this little side note that Russia is a nuclear power and has a nuclear arsenal, of which Ukraine has none. So this very quickly from most of us outsiders was like, this don't look good for Ukraine, because if Russia really wants to break all international laws and just give up on the United Nations, give up on international law, give up on the world as we've known it since World War II. That is respect for sovereignty, the respect for sovereign law in the world, for international law in the world, all of it. If Russia goes down this path, they will obviously win. They will obviously win. There was still hope that Russia wouldn't really just throw away 60 years of international law and history and respect for sovereignty. Even a year ago, a lot of people were like, no, they're not going to do that. They're not going to completely upend the entire international order of the time. How wrong we were. But we weren't there yet exactly a year ago. So there was speculation, and Russia was going to the United Nations saying, of course we're not going to invade. This is ridiculous. We're doing a military exercise, or hey, we're just hanging out. What's the big deal? Other things that were going on, Russia actively denying. It's not going, we're not going to invade Ukraine. We're not looking for, and by the way, U.S. military officials, not U.S. military, U.S. spy agencies, uncovered, and maybe they made this up, but I remember it being reported probably December 2021 that the United States made very public saying, hey, we've gotten some intel that says here's how this war is going to start. Russia's going to blow up something in its own territory, or blow up a major facility in the Donbass region, which is inside Ukraine, but has a bunch of Russian people living in it. And Russia recognizes it as a sovereign entity. Russia's going to blow up something in the Donbass region or in Russia itself. And they're going to use that as a pretext and say that bomb came from Ukraine, and that's why they have to go invade Ukraine, because Ukraine struck them first. And the U.S. immediately came out with this. And if anybody remembers this, and Russia was furious, going, that's ridiculous. We're never going to do that. And the reality is, they probably were. So their story got exposed. Their cover story got exposed even before they had time to enact it. Now, this is speculation on my part at this point. We're looking, and back in history, the report by the United States that this was going to happen, that actually happened. Whether it really was, now it's a matter of speculation. But given Russia's other invasions of the last 10 years, it kind of is their playbook. It's what they do. So it's not shocking that they were planning on using some sort of bizarro attack to use it as justification for why they had to invade Ukraine. Back to the chat room. Swampy Donkey says, but it does have 100 times more active troops than actually have weapons that work. That could be true, Swampy Donkey. Michael 5000 says, you would think they wouldn't do it. One would think. Turd Maestro back in the hizzle. Welcome back, Turd Maestro. It is the real Plat Avenger. Bobbles are also saying yes. Ben, probably too. Does anybody remember this? Ben C114 says, hi, Professor. You might get to this, but how much do you think Russia has been weakened globally due to how this war has gone for them? That is a hard, I could try to answer it real quick, Ben C114, but I'm kind of feeling that you guys are going to vote for me to talk about Russia most of this lecture, so we can certainly let it unfold into future lectures. The quick answer is, it ain't done Russia no good. The other thing that I'm not even sure I have a slide on, maybe I do. The other thing that was happening at the same time, here it is, sanctions. Already, before the invasion of February of last year, already the West was levying sanctions. Team West, I should say. If you're in my class, you know what Team West is. So Team West was already going to the UN saying, hey, Russia's getting ready to invade, and already structuring sanctions against all of Russia's leadership, Vladimir Putin included, all of the oligarchs, all of the rich and wealthy, and the military folks in Russia. Were levied sanctions against them. And then they were also, the Team West was starting to put into place, with the expectation that Russia was going to invade. Team West started to put into place, hey, when they invade, we're going to stop buying your oil. We're going to freeze assets, which they did. We're going to go after, if anybody remember this, go after all the oligarchs, all the rich Russians who own properties across Europe and in the Mediterranean and own super yachts in the Caribbean. We're going to seize all that shit if you guys invade Ukraine. That has since came to pass. So again, this is a year ago before the invasion. U.S. sanctions aimed at Russia could take a wide toll. Senate panel close to approving mother of all sanctions against Russia. U.S. and Germany step up pipeline warnings, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to be exact. They were saying, hey, we're going to shut that sucker down before it even gets open. We're not going to accept natural gas delivered from Russia through this pipeline, $1 billion pipeline, which was just nearing completion at this time last year. UK to ramp up Russian sanctions over aggression. Britain toughens stance on Russia as Russia pressures NATO for assurances. All this is going on in the background before this invasion even happened. So back to your question, Ben C114. Sanctions alone have hurt the upper echelon of Russian society. They now find that they can't vacation in Europe and in the Med, and they can't stash all the money they've stolen from their country in Western bank accounts. They can't own properties in Western countries. They can't vacation there. They can't send their rich kids to Western institutions. And one might say, well, that's not really hurting Russia. You're right. It's hurting the people who are making these decisions in Russia. The average Russian person doesn't have any of these things. The average Russian doesn't have a super yacht to get seized. So you attack, I say you. When countries do sanctions, they particularly try to target and attack those folks in charge of making these decisions on behalf of their country. If you can hurt them, then that might change their decision making. It doesn't really do a whole lot of good to put sanctions on poor people in Russia. They got no power anyway. This is why people debate about the effectiveness of sanctions, period. When you can say, well, you're sanctioning North Korea, but 99% of the people there are starving to death, and they have no power. So you're just making more people starve to death, and you're not hurting the upper echelon. North Korea is an extreme case. In Russia, applying pressure to these rich folks who want to be Western, who want to have all the delights of the world, is an effective tool, and it has hurt that group of people. On top of that, and again, sorry, this is a longer answer that we should probably take at a different time, but you also probably know in the last year that there has been not an embargo against Russian natural gas and oil, but significant down buying of it. So Western Europe and the United States have pretty much tried to cut Russia out of the oil market or simply not buy it from them. Europe relies so heavily on Russian oil and natural gas, it kind of has to buy some, but there's been a brokered deal from the West that I think got passed that said, look, we, the consumer, are actually going to tell you how much we're going to pay. And so because we're going to effectively punish you for this war, we're only going to pay, say, $80 a barrel for oil, even though you can get 120 for it on the open market. We're only going to give you 80. So Russia's lost money there. Russia's lost money in lots of different places for exports. However, the flip side of that is India don't give a shit, and China certainly don't give a shit. So other countries have actually benefited because Russian oil has now become so much cheaper since the West isn't buying it, that India and China and other states are getting oil for cheaper than ever before. So it's not like, I'm not trying to suggest that the embargoes have been so successful no one buys stuff from Russia. No. It's just Team West that doesn't buy stuff from Russia and has made Russian goods, particularly natural gas, oil, timber, other things, raw materials mostly, has made it a glut for Russia. Russia used to export tons of that to the West, but now Russia has too much. And what happens when you have too much? You have to lower the price. So they're having to sell a lot of their goods for discounted prices in order just to raise revenue, period. So yes, the Russian budget has been hit and hit hard for a year, but it's not collapsed it. There for a while, in February, March, April, even into May, the ruble did take a serious hit, the Russian monetary unit, because of all these embargoes and sanctions. Yeah, their economy almost, I won't say almost, but almost defaulted on its debt, and it looked like the ruble was going to collapse. It looked very effective at one point, but they weathered that storm, and Russia's still doing what Russia's going to do. So they've lost money economically. The rich and famous have lost their status and some of their super yachts and their access to some of the places on planet Earth that they like. The average Russian has gotten poorer because their economy is slumping, and it was slumping even before this war. And so you have a combination of a lot of things that it can safely be assumed, yes, Russia is not doing as well as it was before they invaded Ukraine. That's a safe bet. All right, that's a conservative thing to say it's true. Okay, I can't quantify it for you, but Russia ain't doing better because it invaded Ukraine. They've been getting pinched, and the West continues to try to pinch them harder. We can go into more detail about that at a different time, Ben, C14. Michael 5000 says both Russia and Germany have their track record. Yes, they do. By the way, side note, Germany is they've been in a weird situation the whole time because Germany has been very hesitant to get involved in this. Germany has been very hesitant to send tanks or weapons of any kind to Ukraine. Germany and Russia, I won't say they're tight because they're not, but they have a deeper economic and political ties than any other Western country does to Russia. So Germany has been biding its time and kind of hoping this would go away and kind of didn't want to be as openly supportive of Ukraine. But as many of you know, in the last couple months, they've finally come around and they've had to. Germany has probably gotten hit the hardest economically of Team West by having to punish Russia. And again, Germany and Russia have a long political relationship where they kind of respect each other, and they're kind of the power brokers in continental Europe. France is another one too, but Germany and Russia are kind of the big boy power brokers historically and now. And so Germany's been hesitant, but the Russian aggression has forced even the Germans to come around to the table of supporting Ukraine more. Robot Poppy, random question. Will you be at the Wine Lab on February 11th? I don't know why I would be at the Wine Lab. Oh, I'm sorry, Wine Lab. I thought I meant the Vintage Cellar. Yes, I probably will be here on February 11th. I probably will be here every day for this entire semester. Well, I say that, but we also need to start doing wine tastings and lectures in here with students. First time chatter from Madrid, 7389. Thank you, first time chatter, Madrid. Anyone remember the Ghost of Kiev? Ooh, what is that? Why do I know that? Why do I know that? Enlighten me, Madrid. Remind me what Ghost of Kiev is. It's not that show. No. I know that. I can't remember that reference. Enlighten me. Livia 26 says, I remember how big a deal and how scary this seemed a year ago. Then once the newness went away, people seemed to stop caring as much. That is at least what I've seen. Yes, Livia, you just defined every single war in humankind. It all seems terrible and horrible, and everybody's terrified before it starts. Then it's horrible when it starts. And then we all get distracted and start paying attention to something else. The only people that still think war is horrible a month after it starts are the people in the war zone dying. So that's a broad generalization. But yes, it almost is nothing short of a miracle that the press and Team West, the political countries, the political entities within Team West, and other countries on planet Earth have actually reported on the Russian aggression in Ukraine so much that it still is quite active in today's news and in the world eye. That's kind of rare. I myself would have lost the bet on that. I thought, well, like most wars, we'll stop paying attention in 6 months. But this one has kept the world's eye focused on it, largely because of the president of Ukraine. That guy's crazy good in a good way. And because so many folks in Europe are genuinely worried about about the Russians rolling back over. It might be because that curtain is up. I didn't even think about that. Maybe go in the curtain area. Yeah, sorry, we have automatic lights. They're terrible. You think? Okay. What was I just ranting about? Sorry, I lost my train of thought because the lights keep going out. So it is amazing that we're still focused on this war. Oh, I know where I'm at now. And it's largely because we live in a nonstop media cycle, for one. But two, people genuinely care, and Europeans genuinely care, because a lot of folks see this Russian aggression as a possible first wave of Russia taking back over Eastern Europe. I don't even think Vladimir Putin, in all of his now proven insanity, I used to like that dude 20 years ago, but he's insane. Like many leaders who stay in power too long, he's gone crazy. And so I don't think even Putin, in all of his insanity, thinks he was going to take over Germany and France. But let's make no bones about it. He has talked about this for a decade or more and alluded to the fact that he thinks personally the greatest geopolitical crisis of the last century was the USSR falling apart. And he made his intent quite clear many times in the last decade. He kind of thinks it's okay to put the Soviet Union back together again. So all of Eastern Europe and most Europeans look at this saying, no, we all have to work as hard as we can and sacrifice to hold the line in Ukraine. Because if we don't, then Poland's next, and Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are right after that. And now we're back to global war again. So a lot of folks, myself included, say, yeah, you better keep your eye on this one. It's very similar to, and I hate saying this because people then make fun of you, but it's kind of like Hitler. I hate saying that because, it's an old adage that when you pull out Hitler, that means you have no more arguments and you're just going to say Hitler Nazis and you win. I'm not saying Vladimir Putin is Hitler. I'm saying it's analogous to the rise of the Nazis in that Poland, we're back to Poland, when Hitler said to UK and France, by the way, I'm not going to start a world war. I just want Poland back because that's part of Germany. And the Western powers capitulated and said, oh, okay, well, if you just want Poland, then, and you're not going to fight, then, okay, you can have Poland. Once leaders like that get a taste for power, of course he's not going to stop at Poland. And so a lot of people look at that analogy that Hitler taking over parts of Poland saying, hey, that used to be ours, we need that back, and using that as a pretext to take over all of Europe. This looks very similar to Vladimir Putin's play in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin saying, hey, Ukraine's actually part of Russia, we need that back. But just give us that. Just give us that and we'll stop. And it's like, I don't know. I've lived long enough to know that history doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. So that's why many Europeans feel like, no, we're going to have to keep supporting this Ukraine endeavor. We all have to hold the line. Other words, we're setting ourselves back up for a World War II scenario across the plains of Europe. Okay, back to Sammy Bear. It says, Putin used to have an amazing popularity overall. What do you think the impact of this prolonged sort of failure will have on him staying power in the longer term? That is the very good question, Sammy. It's hard to say. He still has very high popularity ratings. He is still backed by the majority of Russians. Not as much as he used to be, though. Anybody, any mother, any father, any brother or sister who is now buried one of their siblings or daughters or sons because of this war doesn't think as highly as Vladimir Putin as they used to. I mean, some of them probably like, let's go kill them all now, nuke them because they killed my son. But most people know this is a personal war that Vladimir Putin personally decided to do. The Ukrainians are of no imminent threat to Russia. They never have been. They never will be. Even if they'd join NATO, they're not an imminent threat to Russia. Even though NATO said we're not going to allow Ukraine to join NATO. By the way, if we were to give a test question, I've already given like a million things worthy of a test question, but Vladimir Putin's Russia has been saying for years, we feel threatened by NATO. NATO's surrounding us. NATO wants to kill us. NATO's whole mission is to get more members so they can kill us all, which I get it. I empathize. I understand that Russia has a inferiority complex, that Russia has a defense complex, that Russia feels encroached upon and surrounded. I get it. I empathize. I might even sympathize, but I mostly empathize. I understand why they would say, hey, NATO seems aggressive to us. As a Westerner, I don't buy it. NATO is a defense organization. It's its founding principle. It has never, ever gone out of its founding principles way. I take it back just one time. But NATO is certainly never going to start a world war because they really hate Russia. That's simply preposterous in today's world, even if Vladimir Putin personally or Vladimir Putin's Russia wants to spin it that way, that they have been saying for years, we have to take back Ukraine. If Ukraine gets into NATO, then they're just going to attack us and kill us all. That was one of the main pretexts. And that was the test question, by the way. What has Vladimir Putin mostly been complaining about? That Ukraine is going to join NATO, and also that NATO's surrounding us. So that was rhetoric that was building for years before this invasion, and it was ramping up even more significantly right before the invasion. In fact, didn't I have something here? Okay, no, not that one. Not that one. Here we go. Putin gripes. Again, this is literally headlines from 1 year ago today. Putin gripes about NATO as U.S. deploys more troops to Europe. NATO's unity an unpleasant surprise for Russia, says Estonia. NATO leaders stream to Ukraine showing support as Russia masses troops. How America's NATO expansion obsession plays into the Ukrainian crisis. It's amazing how I accidentally fall right back into things. So the expansion of NATO was part and parcel part of this for years, and certainly into the last year, and was certainly being used by Putin as a raison d'être, reason of the day of why they had to invade Ukraine, even though NATO had said on many occasions for a decade, we're not letting Ukraine in, we're not even inviting Ukraine to join NATO. So that's a bit of a red herring, but of course I have to acknowledge my Western perspective, which is different than in a Russian perspective. But that's one of the main plays Putin has been making this whole time. I haven't even gotten to any of the slides of the talk yet. We're already 45 minutes in. First time chatter from 2U13V1. Does Russia still have total control over the media that it is broadcasting? Yes. Thank you for that great first time chat question, TU. Yes, there is no such thing as free press in Russia. Only what the individual Russians could pipe in via the internet or radio or other means of communication that are very hard for totalitarian governments to control, especially in an internet age. Russia does control its internet. It greatly controls its internet. It greatly filters its internet, but actually it doesn't even do it as much as China does. So news can get through to average Russians. However, all news stations, all newspapers, all magazines, all periodicals, all information transformation and distribution in Russia is 100% controlled by the state. All radio and TV stations, you can tune into them, by the way. RT is one of the main ones, RT News. You can go look up RT News. It's kind of like a CNN. They do good news reporting. I'm not suggesting it's simply 100% propaganda. Having said that, they only tell the stories that Vladimir Putin wants to tell. And they are obviously pro-government, pro-Putin, pro-war, pro-anything Moscow says. All of even RT does. They do go tune into their station. They do news stories about international news and lots of other things. But it's with a very pro-government bent. And if there is no dissent, you can have dissent in Russia, and then you can have death. And many folks who have dissented and are trying to dissent are making their ways into gulag and prisons as we speak, including one of the main Putin opponents, who I can't believe this guy's still alive. They've poisoned him at least once. They've tried to assassinate him at least twice. He's been kicked out of the country 3 times. He keeps coming back, and they say, you know what, go away. We don't want to have to kill you in front of the world. And he goes right back in, and he's back in jail again for the 3rd, 4th, or 5th time. In fact, he used to be a millionaire. I can't remember the guy's name, but somebody in the chat room, go find the greatest opponent to Putin. Is a politician. He was running for president, and then they said, oh, no, you're a criminal, so you can't run for president. I can't remember what they charged him with, but that kind of thing. So To answer your question, TU, yes, Russia controls everything within its borders, but it's finding it harder and harder to tell its version of this war when it's doing so badly at it. So on day one of this invasion, almost a year ago, Russia was like, oh, we're going to win next week. We'll win in a week. There'll be no casualties. Then it'll be, oh, we're going to win in a month. There'll be no casualties. We're going to win in 6 months, and there'll be no casualties. And then body bags started to come home. And so you can only cover up totalitarian regimes in one-party states like Russia and China can only cover up so much bullshit so long. In China's case, they're like, there's no such thing as COVID. And we lifted all restrictions, but nobody has COVID. And you're like, dude, there's people dropping all over the place. So regimes like that will tell their story, and they get away with it 99% of the time. But when it becomes so obvious to the people that this is nonsense, I see dead people. I see dead people. You can only pull it off so long, and then you discredit yourself. But back to the main point, Vladimir Putin still has outstanding public support. Russians are fiercely proud of their country, as most citizens of most countries are, and very proud of Vladimir Putin, how he's taken the country from a backwater to back to world power status. And this is something I would like to do a whole lecture about perhaps next week. Maybe I just talk about Vladimir Putin next week. Would you like me to do a whole hour just on the rise of Vladimir Putin next week, where we can revisit some of these things? Please press yes now. Back to Michael 5000 says, note, India and China don't give a shit. Oh, I'm sorry about that. You can make that a test question. The Swampy Donkey says, well, for the first 6 months, the West strategy completely backfired. While the Russian petroleum volumes went down, the global spike in petroleum prices made them filthy rich. You are correct. Well played, Swampy Donkey. As they made more money in 2022 than the last few years combined. That seems like a stretch, Swampy Donkey, but I don't dispute you've looked up some facts somewhere. I don't know that they would have made more money in 2022 than the previous 3 years. But now that the supply chain is settled, they're starting to feel the pain. There you go, Swampy Donkey. You are correct. Russia was making a bunch of money in the lead up to war. By the way, also feels like a test question. Anytime there's a lead up to a war that involves a major country, oil prices spike. Energy prices will always spike. Anytime it looks like a war is happening, the price of oil, coal, natural gas, and everything goes through the roof. Everybody's just like, take it, hoard it. It's going to be a war. It's going to cut supply chains. The price of everything goes up. Everybody starts stockpiling. It's very predictable. Let's see. And Michael 5000 says, and I quote, the Ghost of Kiev is the nickname given to the mythical MiG-29 Fulcrum flying ace credited with shooting down 6 Russian planes over Kiev during the Kievan offensive on 24 February 2022. Then no, I have not heard of the Ghost of Kiev. Huh. That's cool. A MiG-29 Fulcrum flying ace credited with shooting down 6 Russian planes? Damn it, I'm behind the times. Various reports, including Security Service of Ukraine, made similar claims. That's okay. Madrid is also following up. Ghost of Kiev was a Ukrainian pilot that shot down an absurd amount of Russian fighter jets. That is crazy. I think it was Top Cruise. I think it was Top Gun. I think it's got to be Mav. That was Maverick. That was Ukrainian Mav. And now a hero within Ukrainian military. Thank you all for tuning me into that. Ethan Owens back on the Hizzle saying, I remember seeing hourly updates when it first started. Now I rarely see an update about this war. Actually, it's not hard, Ethan. It's usually the front page of any major Western publication will be an update about what's going on. They might not be as splashy, but it's still fairly regular press in most periodicals. Robot Puppy says Soviet Union equals bad vibe check. First time chatter from Sammy Clucks. Oh, Sammy Clucks is dropping some knowledge on me. Rhineland, ? Sammy Clucks is referring to, I believe, Hitler's desire to say, hey, these areas that used to be part of Germany that we lost in World War I, that's part of the motherland. We need those back. We need those areas back because they're part of us. IDC I Was Drunk says, wasn't it Czechoslovakia? I think invasion of Poland ended up with the UK and France declaring war. Let's do some fact-checking on pre-World War II. You guys find that out for me. Sammy Clucks is back saying, yes, only here for the podcast says Navalny, Alexei Navalny. There you go. Hannah Scott's also chiming in. A first-time chatter from Dr. Toothslayer. Dr. Toothslayer. Is it true that Putin's health is failing? If he passes away, who is next in line? No, I've heard no claims that any serious claims of Putin's health. And by the way, in a very secretive society where everybody is terrified of Vladimir Putin, including all of the people who work for him, live in mortal terror of him. If indeed he was dying, you will never know. That news would never get out ever, and it would be, even if it did, it would be disputed, and you would never really know what's going on. So even if something is wrong with Vladimir Putin, it's not going to change the game plan. He's not going to step down. It's not going to change the course of anything until he truly kicks the bucket. Which brings me to your next question. If he passes away, who is next in line? Question mark. That's the answer. Question mark. The other bad thing about totalitarian states and fascist states and one-party states is that when you have one person who accumulates all power to themselves, there's never a clear line of succession. Everybody just gets terrified and says, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. Can we invade Ukraine? Yes, sir. Can we win? Yes, sir. Are we winning? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. They call them yes men. So totalitarian leaders and fascists and the like surround themselves with yes men who just tell them what they want to hear because everybody's scared. So they never really get a true sense of what's happening. And they have all the power. And they do that intentionally so that no one can challenge them. And so when they eventually do kick the bucket, you have a bunch of yes men idiots who are around the leader who aren't qualified to lead because they've been cowards their whole lives. And then there's no clear person to step into the big man's shoes. So no one has a clue what will happen post Vladimir Putin's Russia. However, to me, that's not even worthy of speculation. I think the guy's an immortal. I actually think he's a vampire. I've been saying this for decades. I think he's a vampire who just takes different forms throughout the centuries. I think he was Rasputin last go around. First time chatter from IA Arana Discoteca, who says yes. I say a yes from Discoteca, from Livia, from Dr. Toothslayer, from Sammy Bear. On the Putin lecture. Thank you. Well, thank you, first time chatter, Discoteca, and all the others who were saying yes to a full lecture on Putin. Good. We already have next week's podcast picked out. We'll be doing an entire hour on Vladimir Putin. Or 5. No, actually, I got that lecture down pretty good. I've given that before. I gave that at Course Hero like 5 years ago. Of course, I'll have some fun stuff to add to it since he's invading countries now and he's gone insane. Michael 5000 says, Top Gun time. Let's go. Robot Puppy says, Top Gun 3. That's right. Mexican Goose say the Ghost of Kiev may also have just been a propaganda tool at the beginning of the war. His identity is disputed, and even the fact that he existed, so say the internet. I would probably lean towards that story, Mexican Goose. It seems too good to be true, and when a story is too good to be true, it usually is. But it's great propaganda. Michael 5000, I heard that when Putin dies, something is set for nuclear bombs or set to go off. I'm pretty sure that's false, but I heard that somewhere a long time ago. Yeah, that seems a little preposterous that on his deathbed, the leader of the Russians would wish that all of his fellow Russians get killed when he dies. But, it's a fool's errand to try to understand the mind of a psychopath. So he could, and I hesitate to call Vladimir Putin a psychopath. Sociopath, he's borderline sociopath for sure. He's gone kind of insane 100%. He's a megalomaniac 100%. So would he go ahead and sacrifice his entire population when he dies? I mean, I find it hard to swallow, but who knows? Could be, but I don't think so. I would hope that at least the people around him would say, well, he's dead, but we're not all going to die just because he's dead. Toys R Us Kid says power vacuum. That is the exact situation under Vladimir Putin. There is a power vacuum. Although there is one dude. I can think of one dude. Feels like a test question. I can think of one dude who could slip into the shoes and be a very effective leader very quickly. And his name is Dmitry Medvedev. Go look up Dmitry Medvedev. He actually was president for a stint. And I think he's the prime minister now. I don't know. Him and Vladimir Putin went back and forth in titles for 8-year run. And Medvedev is actually a pretty solid character. I mean, maybe he's drank the Kool-Aid now too. But he came to America. Didn't he go to not Napa Valley, Silicon Valley, Katie, when he started a Twitter account. So, yeah, when Dmitry Medvedev was president, I want to say that was 2012 to 2016. He was much more business-oriented. He's a younger dude. He's a sober dude. He has a good head on his shoulders. He obviously is part of the superstructure. That's how he was allowed in to share the power, or at least be a placeholder while Vladimir Putin changed the Constitution so that he could become president again, and then for life. And so Medvedev is the likely choice only because he's actually held the position before and was decently respected and is seen as not a sociopath. By the way, I would love to see Dmitry Medvedev back in power in Russia because he was sane. I can't speak on behalf of Russians, but if I was a Russian, I wish Medvedev would take back over now and end this war. He was again a big business guy who came to Silicon Valley to try to figure out how to have a Russian Silicon Valley and was warming ties with the West. Warming is perhaps a strong word, but he came to the United States and he toured around the world and did other stuff. So again, maybe he's too far gone down the Kool-Aid path at this point too, but that would be my choice. That's the only likely candidate for a semi-stable Russia, short of the likelihood that a military general will take over. And if Putin were happen to die, probably a military general will take over. Okay. Let's see. Michael 5000 says Putin is the queen. Madrid says, didn't Putin used to work for the KGB? You'll find that out next week, but the quick answer is yes. Robot Puppy 113 says, who would win a battle, Putin or Daffy Duck? Oh, that's a tough one. And 2Ye says, DuckTales, Daffy, or regular Daffy? We've gotten through 2 slides and we're talking about Daffy Duck. Livia says, I heard that too. He worked for the KGB. Maybe it was the same class. It was this class, though. Well, maybe, but we just started this class. 2U113 said Daffy would win. And ICD, I was drunk, says, not so sane anymore as it seems. I agree, not so sane anymore. But I was only going to lecture for an hour. We only got through 2 slides. So let's fast forward to, let's go back to the future, Marty. Let's go back 1 year ago, again, to wrap up a few slides I have. Again, the reason why the United States and all of its allies, and most of the world, by the way, because China's got great spy technology too, so this wasn't a secret. And what everybody was watching from March 2021 to December 2021 into January 2021, or 2022, is that Russia had built up, I believe, at the end of the day, 130 to 150,000 troops ended up on the border with Ukraine, along with a hell ton of equipment and battle tanks and missile things. And this wasn't a secret. And therefore, everybody was talking about it and saying, hey, dudes, what's going on here? This is just a kind of a zoom in. There were also troops, and they have increased troops in Belarus, which one of the kind of extra things we've learned since this Ukrainian invasion is that Belarus is now a complete and utter puppet state. It would likely just be reabsorbed into Russia, but feels like a test question. Why wouldn't Russia just reabsorb Belarus? They could do it tomorrow with no fight at all. They could literally just go to the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, who's a total puppet / D-bag, And they could just say, by the way, you're now a new state of Russia. We're absorbing you effective tomorrow. And he would go, okay. He's a dork. So they could, bloodless coup, take over Belarus. But why would they not? Why would they not do that? And the answer is because as part of Russia, it's just Russia growing bigger and getting scarier and absorbing more territory in Eastern Europe, which is what's scaring everybody. Leaving Belarus as a separate state, even though it's a total puppet, means that, no, look, Russia's nice. They're not trying to take over Eastern Europe. And more to the point that Belarus, as an independent sovereign state, is an ally. They're an ally. And they can go to the United Nations, where Belarus has a seat, and protest and say, Russia's good. Why is everybody picking on Russia? So it makes more sense to have an independent puppet state, Belarus, that gives credence to Russia's arguments and can stand up in support of Russia at international institutions than it is to have a full-on absorbed state of Belarus. My point of that is that even a year ago, Russia started moving Russian troops into Belarus around the border with Ukraine. So this is a multi-pronged affair. That's important because from Russian territory, it's slightly harder to take the capital of Ukraine, Kiev. It's a few hundred miles away, 200 miles away. If you look at the map there, if you station a bunch of troops in Belarus, you're 50 miles away. So this is one of the reasons why the U.S. and others are saying, hey, dude, this invasion is happening. The way you're putting troops in here, there is no doubt that you're coming into this country. And again, part of the setup for this that we'll talk about more perhaps next week, since we're almost out of time or are out of time, is that you see the little map that just popped up there. There was already this separatist controlled area you see over there in the eastern side of Ukraine that was controlled by pro-Russian, ethnically Russian people who lived in Ukraine, and that for the last 7 years the Russian military was funneling money, guns, and weapons into in order to keep them as a separatist-controlled area. And in the lead up to this invasion, Russia, Vladimir Putin's Russia, actually said, oh, those little areas of eastern Ukraine, we actually recognize them as independent states. They're not part of Ukraine, and we're also going to offer them to join Mother Russia. We're going to put it to a vote and let them vote to see if they want to join Russia. So all that was happening behind the scenes too. Okay. Babelzar says a little over 100K dead on both sides at this point. That number seems high, but it could be, Babelzar. I'd have to go do some research on that. Michael 5000 says technically the U.S. could bomb Russia from Alaska. Of course we could. And yes, you're not advising it. Me either. Dr. Toothslayer says thoughts on how long this war will last, knowing Ukraine will have support from other countries. Let's see, Dr. Toothslayer. If I could answer that question, I'd be a really rich person, because everybody wants to know the answer to that question. The answer is this war will last anywhere from a day to a century, plus or minus 24 hours to 100 years, plus or minus another 10 years. Okay, 2U13 says, isn't that a one-way street to possible MAD, mutually assured destruction? Well played with your acronyms, TU13V1. Yes, it is. And ICDCI was drunk. Is it possible that I saw you in Major Williams a few days ago? Was that an imposter? That, my friend, was an imposter. I cannot remember the last time I was on campus, much less in Major Williams. That's an intriguing question, though. Who is the imposter? Okay. Okay, and the final kind of wrap up from exactly 1 year ago today. From Stalin to Putin, Ukraine is still trying to break free from Moscow. U.S. and Russia spar over Ukraine crisis at the Security Council. The U.S. and its allies were trying to pass condemnations of Russia. Of course, Russia and China were blocking those condemnations because for those of you that have already taken my class, you know how the Permanent Security Council works at the United Nations, right? For those of you in my class, you'll learn soon. And last one, who's to blame in the Ukraine-Russia standoff? It depends on perspective. Yes, Russia and their Chinese allies and a lot of other pundits from around planet Earth, even ones in Western countries, were saying it's all the U.S.'s fault. It's all NATO's fault that Russia's doing this because NATO keeps growing and threatening Russia, so Russia has to go invade. It's not their fault. They have to go invade, which, of course, is Vladimir Putin's byline. I have to go invade. I have to go take over another country because you guys have a defense organization that might, I don't know, be defensive. Okay. And now, we're only now 1 hour later getting to now. And now, what's the state of the state? Exactly 1 year ago. I'm sorry, 1 year later. That's today. And I just picked up a handful of stories. I think most of you probably know some of this already. But in a wave of strikes, this is just from yesterday, I think. Russian missiles killed 12 across Ukraine. What's been happening specifically in the last few months is that Russia has not fared well on the battlefield, has lost territory back to Ukrainian forces, and in the last few months has become much more deadly in terms of just lobbing missiles at everything, just bombing cities, bombing hospitals, bombing orphanages. Of course, I'm being propaganda here, but bombing civilian areas. Mostly, it's been bombing the energy grid of Ukraine in a quite intentional respect to basically black out Ukraine, and so they'll all freeze to death in the winter. So bombing out the entire energy grid almost daily, if not definitely weekly, trying to keep them in the dark, trying to keep their communications down and their energy down and their heat down and debilitate them mentally and morally. It hasn't worked. The quick answer is, and that hasn't really worked. They're back to that. So that story from yesterday, the one that says Russian missile blitz signals escalation, that started back in October. Like I said, it's been several months now that Russia has changed tactic from trying to fight men against men in a battlefield to just bombing, sending missiles in, because of course when you just send missiles, there's no casualties on your side. Many of these missiles are intercepted by Ukrainian forces and anti-missile defense strategies. Many of those strategies and defense missile systems have been supplied by the United States, including the Patriot missile system. So what's going on in the background, the last few months, Russia has been on an intentional bombing campaign. And for those of you that know about how military warfare works, especially in this part of the world, most armies don't fight in wintertime. It's too hard. It's too cold. It's too hard. It's as debilitating to your people as it is to the people you're trying to kill. So usually armies don't fight in a Russian winter, but you can bomb missiles. You can bombard them with missiles, and that's what's been going on. Also, in the last 6 months, the Russians, because they've lost so many soldiers, instituted a national draft. And I can't remember last time that happened on planet Earth, where they said, yes, everybody of fighting males of fighting age in Russia, you have to go sign up for the draft. And they drafted 300,000 new soldiers, which they've been, I assume, been trying to train to go to the battlefront in spring. It apparently looks like no one's waiting for spring, by the way, because there has been missile strikes going both ways between Ukraine and Russia all throughout winter. And I'll just get in closer. There have been some pitched battles even during winter, and there's been troop movement all during winter, and there's been reinforcements of troops and weapons and munitions all throughout winter. So this is a atypical fight for this part of the world, which leads many to worry that this could get hotter, very much hotter again, much quicker than we assumed. We all assumed it would be spring before this war would be back on, and it looks like it's just going to keep on going. Okay. And the other thing that's happened in the last year is that Russia initially took a bunch of territory. It reinforced the Donbass region that it has controlled. It's part of the region that they said, oh, that's already independent. It's already held by pro-Russian rebels or pro-Russian forces and been reinforced by the Russian military. So Luhansk and Donbass are the regions you've heard about over in the east that are kind of part of Russia. But when the Russian invasion did start on February 24th, they took over a bunch of other territories. The Russian army did. And slowly, and what you see is two different maps here, one from September 1st, that the Russian military has lost battles in the field and has been pushed back across cities and towns and territories. So the Ukrainians have taken stuff back. And going back even further, back to April 12th, several months after this, I'm sorry, January, February, March, yeah, just a couple months after Russia came in and swooped in and invaded from multiple sides and took over territory. Even in April, the Ukrainian forces had pushed Russian forces back out of territories they had taken in the central northern part of the country. So Russia has lost areas that it had taken initially in the north central and in the northwest and some in the southeast. So Ukrainian forces rallied and continued to push back. A lot of news stories that have happened just in the last month you might have seen, Germany confirms it will provide Ukraine with the all-important Leopard 2 tanks. These are the top-of-the-line, best battle tanks on planet Earth, and of course the Germans make them. And this was something that has been debated and fought about on the international stage for months and months and months now. Part of the reason why the Germans finally caved into this demand, not a demand, a request. The president of Ukraine has been requesting, dudes, we're taking back territory, but we need more guns, we need more tanks, we need more jets, we need more missiles, we need defense missiles, we need attack helicopters, we need everything. But they're really pushing the tanks. Why, by the way, feels like a test question, why would they be pushing tanks so much? What's the big deal about tanks? I remember 20 years ago, or at least 10 years ago, giving a lecture about the future of warfare. And I distinctly remember saying, well, tank warfare is done. No one ever will need tanks again on planet Earth, ever. And I was not alone. I gleaned that knowledge from military historians and analysts. They're like, no, tank warfare is over. Who the hell would ever get into tank warfare again? It's completely worthless. Nobody's investing in tanks. Future wars are fought with missiles and technology. No one's getting in a tank. Well, we were all wrong about that too. So the question is, why would Ukraine specifically need and be requesting battle tanks? And the answer is physical geography, my friend. Ukraine is often referred to as the breadbasket of Europe, because it is, because they produce a shit ton of grain, shit ton of wheat, shit ton of everything, shit ton of sugar beet. It's a big agricultural area, thus the term breadbasket. It's one of the reasons why Russia wants them back too, by the way. In fact, they're even called the Ukrainian black earth or the black soils. They're so rich. They're very productive. My point being, it's kind of flat. It's an agricultural area. Here's a question. What's the biggest mountain range in Ukraine? The answer is none. So it's a fairly flat area. And in these circumstances, when you have two giant armies facing off against each other on an open plain, yeah, battle tanks. They're back in fashion. You would never use battle tanks in Switzerland. It's too mountainous. You can't do anything with them. It's one of the reasons why Germany never took over Switzerland. But on flat land, yeah, they're quite effective at pushing back big groups of men with guns. So the physical geography, the lack of terrain, I should say the flatness of the terrain, the open plains, lend themselves to tank warfare, something that most of us thought was never going to happen again. And that's why the Ukrainian president has been begging for these tanks. And not just any tanks, the Leopard 2 tanks, the baddest ass tanks that are out there. So Germany didn't want to supply them for reasons that I mentioned earlier. And so I think the impasse was broken, and I've not seen this officially anywhere, but NATO countries met just a couple weeks ago, and not even that, it was last week, wherein they were trying to pressure Germany, saying, hey, look, we're all giving Ukraine tons of money. We're all supplying food. We're all supplying fuel. We're all supplying defensive weapons. Let's call them defensive weapons, because no one wants to give Ukraine like a nuclear missile because Ukraine would use it, and now we're into a World War III scenario. And so all the weapons that the West has been giving to Ukraine or wants to give to Ukraine are defensive in nature. They don't want to openly inflame Russia. So when Russia says, this is bullshit, you guys giving you're giving enemies of ours that we're in a war with weapons, so basically you're fighting us. The West can say, no, we're not. We're giving them defensive weapons to defend themselves because you guys invaded a sovereign state that we all recognize. So that's been the delicate balance with Team West is, Give the Ukrainians enough to defend, but don't give them too much, because if they go on the offensive, that might entice Russia to use nuclear weapons against Ukraine itself, or launch a broader campaign against NATO countries. And now we're back to World War III and mad, and we're all dead. So everyone's been on that tightrope. We want to send enough, but don't give them too much. Because quite frankly, Ukraine's doing quite good on its own, but give them enough to keep going, but not enough to attack Russia openly. Okay, that's the reason for the tanks. And what I was going to say is, I believe the impasse was broken. The NATO meeting happened. Everybody said, Germany, please give these tanks, and give permission, by the way. Give permission to all the countries you've sold the Leopard 2 tanks to. Give them permission to give them to Ukraine. Because apparently they have gentlemen's agreements with weapons of mass destruction and death. I did not know this. So the gentleman's agreement is, and not to be sexist, but I don't know too many female weapons manufacturers out there, or people that really enjoy making weapons of mass destruction. They're mostly men. So the gentleman's agreement apparently is, we are going to make the Leopard 2 tanks, which are effectively deadly. And we will sell them to you, Poland and Estonia, and I don't know, Switzerland. But the gentleman's agreement is you won't sell them to anybody else. Why is it I have a British accent for a gentleman's agreement? I don't know, but it seems appropriate, does it not? So the NATO countries are saying, please, Germany, send them some defensive Leopard 2 tanks, and give permission to all the other countries you've sold Leopard 2 tanks to also go. And Germany did not agree to that meeting. But lo and behold, last week, Germany changed its mind. And I think it was because U.S. President Joe Biden said on his own accord, well, we're going to send tanks. So we're going to send a bunch of U.S. tanks. They're not as good as the Leopard 2. Which I actually find hard to believe. I thought the U.S. made pretty darn good everything of mass destruction. But Joe Biden said, no, we're going to send tanks, and we heartily encourage our German friends to. And we're also going to send Patriot missiles and missile defense, and we're going to send all this other stuff. And so there might have been a backroom chat there with the U.S. saying, hey, look, dudes, Germany, if you're that wimpy about confrontation with Russia, and you're worried that if you send tanks first, that will aggravate Russia. You know what? We'll do it. We'll aggravate Russia first. And again, this is speculation. And whenever the U.S. said, we're going to send tanks, apparently that was enough. And Germany said, okay, we're going to send some tanks too. And we get permission for everybody else to send the Leopard 2s as well. I just threw up this headline from earlier today. An ex-NATO commander says the West sending Ukraine tanks creates real problems for Putin. And it does. Because Ukraine, again, has been kind of pushing back Russia on the ground, and these tanks will make it much deadlier for Russian army to take back over larger swaths of land from Ukraine. Much harder. Again, the reality is Russia has enough ammunition to just bomb Ukraine into oblivion. They can nuclear bomb it tomorrow, and the war is over. But they don't want to do that. I don't think they want to be seen as genocidal maniacs yet. And if you nuclear bomb all of Ukraine, then you make it unusable for yourself, which I think they want to have the land. So it is, again, we're in this tightrope situation that everybody's worried about World War III, and nobody really wants World War III. And we're just going about different ways to prevent World War III, even though it seems like Vladimir Putin's Russia's kind of backed into a corner now because they're losing. And it looks bad to their people. And it makes them look weak in the world. And you don't want to back a nuclear-armed country into a corner too much and embarrass them too much, because then that entices them to use nuclear weapons. So we're all just trying to, hey, guys, let's... everybody's having a war here, but let's keep the war civil. Shall we not make this nuclear, even though we're going to keep funneling in stuff on both sides? Okay. Other stories from earlier in the month or last few months, the U.S. will send a Patriot air defense system to Ukraine, which will help fend off the huge expanse in missile attacks that Russia has undergone since winter officially kicked in. And I can update you now in the last 7 days. Ever since this tank deal was announced, Russia has gone, it's flipped its proverbial lid and really started sending missiles. And it's because they're furious, they're angry, and they're just going to keep punishing Ukraine as much as they can to try to demoralize them into stopping this war, because they know every second that ticks by and Ukraine gets more weapons and Ukraine gets these tanks and Ukraine gets a Patriot air defense system, every second that ticks by makes it harder for Russia to do anything else. And it's making it's making Putin's job a lot harder. It's making the general of the Russian army's job much harder. And there's going to be more death coming for them. And this is making them furious, which is why they've been doing more and more and more missile attacks. They're trying to decimate everything they can before spring gets here. And I'm assuming they're going to have an offensive movement at that point. But if those tanks get there before the Russian army invades, now we got troubles. The other one from today, first tanks, next fighter jets. President Volodymyr Zelensky is imploring the allies to speed up deliveries of tanks and other weapons. And he even wants long-range missiles and fighter jets, which long-range missiles he's not going to get for the reasons I've now outlined. The West is not going to inflame and antagonize Russia directly by giving Ukraine an offensive weapon that could strike within Russia, which, by the way, Ukraine already has done with its own weapons. So that's not going to happen. Fighter jets, little Top Gun action, possibly. That could possibly happen. Again, if fighter jets are given to Ukraine, it's going to be given under the auspices of these jets are not to leave the country. You can fight down, you can do Top Gun barrel rolls and shoot down Russian MiGs in your territory, but do not take them across the line. Do not go into Russian territory, or we're going to be very angry. And now we can kind of wrap this up. Let's see. I just want to shout out to the Swampy Donkey who took World Regions in 2006. Wow. That is awesome. Thank you for that. And still tuning in, Swampy Donkey. You were too awesome. Let's see. What else did I miss? I missed some comments going far back. Damn it. I'll try to read these off real quick, and then we'll finish up with what's happened in the last year, although I've already started to talk about what's happened in the last year. What's that? Who's waiting? Okay, well, I'll finish up in 5 minutes. How about this? Let's see. Swampy Dunk says, "Don't ban me, boy." I almost wrote that as a poem. Turdmeister says, "Vlad sounds like a chill bro." Let's see. Madrid says, "Hitler had to learn the hard way not to fight during a Russian winter, as did Napoleon before him." Right, Madrid? Let's see. Bajwa took World Regions exactly a year ago as well. You were so entertaining, well-spoken in an informational sense, that I had to say thank you, Bajwa. Babelzar says, "Fall and spring usually mean muddy grounds in Ukraine, but winter means hard ground, which is better for tanks." That could be true, Babelzar, but they typically don't fight in winter. Everybody usually takes the winter off for fighting. Russia might be trying to push in before the wet season. That could be. Semi Bear says, "Bet that draft isn't popular, especially with Ukraine possibly acquiring longer-range missiles soon." You are correct, Semi Bear. Hundreds of thousands of Russians left Russia and are now in the east and in Kazakhstan, and some even went to China. Michael 5000 says, "Well, Hitler actually didn't learn his lesson. Hitler served in World War I, and once again he fought Russians in the winter." Robot Puppy says, "Tractors stealing the tanks, part 2." Babelzar says, "The problem with Abrams tanks going to Ukraine is that the last of the supply chain required to keep them running." Yeah, you're right. I'm not sure we got parts for those suckers. We're going to have to build the facilities in Poland and Germany to support them. That may exactly happen. That's the repercussions that happen, unknown repercussions that happen because of war. Is you're going to see more troop stationed in Eastern Europe, which has already happened. You're going to see more missiles stationed in Eastern Europe, which has already happened. You're going to see perhaps more munitions plants and tank plants and other economic boons happening in Eastern Europe. And that's starting to happen. Let's see. Michael 5000 says, "Wouldn't it destroy the land if they want the farming land? They would destroy some of it." Yeah, but land is resilient. They're not worried about that. Thanks, Swampy Donkey, for taking the class back in 2006. Let's see. Favorite professor check. I'm not sure I understand that. "I feel the only problem with sending everything to Ukraine is the U.S. is using money that we don't have," says Michael 5000. That is true. The counter argument for that, Michael 5000, would be, well, we can spend a little bit of money now, push Russia out of Ukraine, and that settles that. Or we can let Ukraine be taken over by Russia, and then, Michael 5000, do you want them to go ahead and give them Poland? Do you want to give them Latvia? Do you want to give them Czechoslovakia? And that's always the bigger question: is it more cost effective to confront this situation now, or let them do what they want and hope they stop? And usually the answer is you probably want to do something about that now. Bobblesar says sending fighter jets isn't helpful. It takes at least a year to train pilots on the new system. Yes, Bobblesar, and go Google fighter jet trainers arrive in Ukraine. That happened last week as well. Thanks for bringing that up. Only here for the Plaidcast, back in the hizzle, saying in light of the promised tanks and other recent escalations in Western support, has the likelihood of an eventual Ukrainian attempt at retaking ground in Crimea measurably shifted? It has. They are talking openly now about taking Crimea Peninsula back over from Russia, which terrifies Vladimir Putin. It seems like an impossibility, but the fact that the Ukrainians have survived this far also seemed like an impossibility exactly a year ago today. So yes, it could just be for propaganda, only here for the Plaidcast. But the Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, has been now openly speaking of, we are not going to the negotiating table with Russia until they leave all our territory, including Crimea Peninsula. And if they don't want to leave willingly, we're going to help them leave unwillingly. By the way, this guy was a comedian. He was a stand-up comedian like Jerry Seinfeld with his own TV show in Ukraine. And then he became president, if you didn't know that backstory. This guy's fascinating. First time chatter from Pro Hanp. How do you think the impacts and decisions made in this war have been affected by modern day social media? And does it draw any parallels to the Vietnam War and TV? I like where you're going with that, Pro. Very good first time chat. Certainly the second relating of the war to the international community has kept the eye of the world on this. It certainly has propelled and incentivized Western countries and others to support the Ukrainian cause. Certainly, the images of death and destruction, very much like in the Vietnam War, do keep people actively pro-Ukraine. So even if you don't care about politics, and you may even say, I don't give a shit if Russia takes over Ukraine, I don't know where either one of them is on a map, and they don't do nothing for me anyway. And then you see the bodies of a bunch of kids blown up in a school. You know, that actually has a big impact and does keep, again, people's heads in the game of, this doesn't seem good. I'm going to continue to be pro-Ukrainian and even soften my stance of maybe we should help them. So yes, I like the parallels you've drawn there. And yes, for those of you that don't know what Pro Hanp is talking about, the imagery that started to come back from the Vietnam War did play a major role in an anti-war movement in America that eventually did become impactful enough for the U.S. to pull out of that war. One would think the same thing should be happening in Russia, but why is it not? Feels like a test question. Why are the people of Russia still supporting this war? That's right, because their government controls all the information they see, and they're not seeing dead children blown up in streets. If they see dead children blown up in streets, the caption is, Ukrainians kill their own children in streets. That's the problem with, again, despotic regimes, is the citizens there are fed a line of BS that they don't know anything different. So, of course, they support their government. You know, Vladimir Putin has been saying for 10 years, NATO is coming to kill you all. They're going to kill us all. You should literally sleep under your bed. They're going to kill us all. We have to take back Ukraine. They're going to kill us all. Now, I'm being, agitated and over the top, and I'm painting an extreme picture. Vladimir Putin's never said NATO's going to kill us all. But his behavior has basically been saying that. And his speeches he gives is, the whole West is against us. All of them are against us. They all hate us. They want Russia to fail. They want Russia to die and destroy us. He has been quite open about that. And so his people only know this story. And if we lived in a world where everybody's like, oh my God, have you heard about Puerto Rico? Have you heard about Puerto Rico? Puerto Rico has nuclear weapons and they want to kill everyone in America. Oh my God, have you heard about Puerto Rico? They're going to kill us. If that's all you ever heard, you'd be like, shit, I didn't even know where Puerto Rico was. Why do they hate us? I don't know, but we should probably invade Puerto Rico. That's what control of information can do for a government who wants to utilize it in that way. Okay. TU113V says, is it bad that this stream reminds me a lot of NPR that plays on the radio when my mother drives? I'm sorry. I'll try to not be NPR-ish, but I'll end with this. So what happened in the last year? And I just showed you the slide from earlier. Russia denies it plans to invade Ukraine. Putin remaining options are still risky. That was a year ago. And then February 24th, Russia invaded Ukraine after Russia said it was not going to invade Ukraine. So February 24th, 2022, we are down to T-minus 24 days. I think tomorrow is the 31st, so 25. T-minus 25 days before this war will officially be 1 year old. So it's 11 months old, just over 11 months old. And here's what all of us thought, including myself, okay? All of us. Let me make sure you heard me. All of us. All of the world, all of the pundits, all of the teachers, all of the military analysts, all the strategists, all the politicians. Everyone said, oh, this sucks. They actually did it. This war is going to be over in a few days. The Russians moved so quickly, and as I already suggested at the top of the last hour, the Russian military is so much bigger than the Ukrainian military. It was shooting fish in a barrel. We're all like, nope. It's literally, again, I talked about this a year ago. I could show you the slides next week where I said, yeah, this was not going to be really a war. This is going to be over in a few days. I'll admit when I'm wrong. It defies all logic. But here's a headline: Putin to seize capital in days. And within days of those headlines coming out, that didn't happen. And then it didn't happen in months. And then it really hasn't happened in a year. So what happened was that we were all wrong, and the Russians were wrong too. They thought there would be no resistance. They thought that the Ukrainian army was not nearly strong enough to stand up to them. They thought for sure, even if they did try to stand up to them, they would annihilate them. They pretty much shot down every Ukrainian plane before in the first hours of the invasion. They blew up all the military bases in Ukraine. They blew up all the planes. And then, 100,000 Russians come across the border. It looked pretty one-sided. And then it didn't happen. It didn't happen that way. And the Ukrainians not only fought back, they fought back valiantly and very well. And it's a funny thing, when you're defending your home territory, how much harder you fight. The U.S. found this out in Vietnam. By the way, Napoleon found it out in Russia. It's very hard to fight people when they have the home field advantage and they're motivated by the fact they know if you take over, you're going to kill them all. So it was nothing short of a shock that 1 week went by and Ukraine survived, and then a month went by and Ukraine had survived, and then in the second month, they started pushing the Russians back to the shock of everyone. And you're like, holy crap, what's going on here? This is like Rocky, the original Rocky. Like, this guy can't win this fight. Oh my God, he's fighting back. So that's what's happened, and we can get into all the details of the last year, but that's pretty much what's happened. And it's gone back and forth, but it's mostly for the last 6 to 8 months been favorable to Ukraine. They pushed, as I pointed out, pushed Russia back out of territories that the Russian army occupied. They've taken back strategic cities. They blew up a bridge that was the only bridge to go to the Crimean Peninsula, which really pissed off Vladimir Putin. They have suffered and survived through thousands of missile strikes. I don't even know what the number is. They have no energy. Their energy grid is destroyed. It has to be rebuilt partially every day and then get destroyed again the next week. But that has caused an outpouring of support from Team West that is trying to help keep them afloat, and keep afloat they have been. And so here we are almost a year later with a furious Russia that thought this was going to be 3 days' work. They have egg all over their collective Putin face. They fired the military generals of Russia twice and tried to get back on track, and now enlisted 300,000 new recruits that they're going to try to overrun Ukraine with in spring, we assume. And it just don't look good for Russia, but at the same time, it don't look good for Ukraine either. I'm not trying to make light of this scenario. Ukraine ain't out of the woods yet, and Russia can just simply bomb them into oblivion in perpetuity. Russia will just keep making missiles and buy missiles from Iran, by the way, and keep bombing them until they give up. But apparently Ukraine's not going to give up. So that's where we find ourselves a year later. By the way, side note to end this with, did anybody see that a bomb-making factory in Iran just got bombed yesterday? And as soon as that happened, if you know about the world like I do, you're like, oh, Israel just did that with a drone. And indeed, that is who exactly did it. So Iran has been funneling drone bombs to Russia so Russia can bomb Ukraine. Team West hates Iran. Israel really hates Iran. So there's been some happenings behind the scenes that compelled or incentivized Israel to start bombing bomb-making factories in Iran. Say that 10 times fast. See how all this is connected to a broader picture outside of these two countries and even outside of the region that they're located in. That's what's been going on in the last year. That catches you up a little bit, and next week we'll talk solely about the rise of one Vladimir Putin and why he decided to conduct this war, because that's what I was going to talk about tonight. I was